The Attitude Era was filled with plenty of colorful and larger-than-life characters. There was a strong promotion from the WWF to show and present these men and women as modern-day gladiators. And for many of us in our childhood, that's how we viewed these wrestlers. No matter what era we're talking about, these men risk their careers all for entertaining the fans, and often these guys push the limits. Mick Foley was seen as a man who went beyond the lines, but even with all of his crazy spots, the fans didn't realize there was another man on the roster that would make a career out of these risky moments: Jeff Hardy. Hardy rose up the ranks with his brother to become one of the most loved and inspiring tag teams. Jeff in particular loved taking these spots on the regular, and coupled with his very unique charisma, it was a star of the future. Jeff had accomplished a lot by the age of 24. He was a multiple-time tag team champion, one of the best tag team wrestlers of all time, and a former intercontinental champion. The sky was the limit for the charismatic Enigma, but the moment he split from his brother due to the brand split, Jeff Hardy began to falter. Hardy couldn't keep himself in check and began making some very dumb mistakes. These come up a lot throughout his career, but this was the beginning, and it was because of the years of wear and tear from his body. This man still had a long career ahead, but was feeling like Mick Foley at age 32. Even then, Hardy was still going out there and doing the same stuff. It did lead to some good moments, such as his match with The Undertaker, but WWE was becoming worried with him because of his behavior. He was more interested in making music and actually asked for his release on 2 occasions. They ended up releasing him though after he refused to go to rehab. Matt Hardy on the other side was doing some of his best work in his entire career, and Jeff was in a weird spot before his release. He had a heel turn that went nowhere, in a storyline with Trish Stratus, and of course there was hope he'd come back and learn a lesson, but from the time being, he was better off being away. His first appearance outside of WWE was at the ROH Death Before Dishonor show in July. The show had been hyped up a lot, and a part of that hype was for Hardy's debut. Joey Matthews came out, Crazy K came out, but when Hardy showed up, even before he came out of the curtain, the fans booed like crazy and shouted Hardy sucks. You'd think Logan Paul showed up in ROH. These guys wanted no part. This wasn't 2001, and this wasn't even Jeff Hardy, it was Will-O-the-Wasp. Then he went on to change their perception, in another world. You see, Hardy's performance here was terrible. It wasn't the best. He comes out with a mask, takes it off while wearing a jacket, nobody knows his gimmick, he looked rough, and I'd be traumatized for life if the crowd was chanting, "We want Matt," at me. That would be my wake-up call. Hardy was very upset by the reaction from the crowd and called the promotion Ring of Horror. It wasn't a good performance for him. There were some botches, not necessarily from Hardy, but the whole thing wasn't a good experience. Time had passed, and heading into WrestleMania season, WWE began negotiating with Hardy on a potential return. Jeff was set to come back to SmackDown as a part of the Cruiserweight division. There was even plans for him to return at WrestleMania 20, but he ended up doing something entirely different. Now, around this time period, there was rumblings that Jeff would return with his brother Matt. It makes sense because Matt Hardy had just turned face, he needed some help against Kane, but instead, he went to TNA. Hardy debuted with the help of his brother Matt as he put in a good word for him to Jeff Jarrett. This is a way to keep him on the straight path. He debuted on the 100th pay-per-view of TNA, which was the 2nd anniversary of the show, and he came out to his own theme song called Modest. And unlike the ROH crowd from the previous year, the fans welcomed him. He looked much better than his last major appearance, and this was his first match, by the way. He looked good. He challenged AJ Styles for the X Division Championship. This was a decent match, especially for Hardy's first match in about a year. Styles, of course, here was incredible. He was in ridiculous form during this time period, but then Kid Cash in Dallas ruined everything. Despite this, the two faces stood tall. Hardy was presented as the hottest free agent by Dusty Rhodes at the time, and to understand Hardy's popularity, he even gave him a title shot, but the alpha male, Monty Brown, refused to let this go down. The shot was his. Brown didn't care about Hardy's previous accomplishments. The champion dressed like he's leading the opera, tried to drag the conversation away from the title, and he told Hardy that just like Hogan and Sting, he's not going to do anything here. Not with him as champion. Let me stop the video for a moment. Anytime I go back to TNA from the years of 2004 to 2006, Jeff Jarrett one way or another brings Hulk Hogan and Sting into the conversation and how he got rid of them. Shockingly, I've heard this more times than I've seen a Jeff Jarrett dirty finish. Hardy gave him a beating and a half, but ran into the pounce. Even then, he stood tall only to walk into a guitar shot from the King of the Mountain. So this was Hardy's beginnings. It felt like they were pushing him a bit higher, potentially towards the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. But at the same time, this was a common occurrence from TNA. You know, they used to do this with the ex-WWE stars. But with Jeff Hardy at the same time, they didn't really know how long he'd stay around. So it's like they can't really build a long-term story with him. Heading into the #1 contenders match, Brown was undefeated. He hadn't lost a match until he ran into the charismatic Enigma. Basic match here, but Hardy gets the title shot. Much better than their later match, I will say. Brown was protected with Jarrett causing issues on the outside. Even then, he still saved Jarrett with the pounce because he thought he should be the one to beat the King of the Mountain instead of Jeff Hardy. The champion felt that they shouldn't wait for long, that they should have the match immediately. This was a setup with the Elite Guard coming in. Now, heading into the event, Hardy was being targeted by Jarrett and Brown. Monty was motivated by a title shot with Jarrett promising to give him the match if he took out Jeff Hardy. For Jarrett, he considered Hardy an outsider to TNA wrestling. Unfortunately, This was one of Hardy's better singles matches in TNA, and I'm just talking about his first run, by the way. This was one of the better matches, and it wasn't even all that, which is a common occurrence during this run. I also have to mention that this was the final match in the weekly pay-per-view era for TNA, so in some ways, it was the end of an era. This was a Jeff Jarrett match on steroids, but maybe it would have a good ending, right? Keep on dreaming. There was also additional drama on the outside between Russo and Rhodes. The commentary reacting like they never saw this finish before. It was messy. The story wasn't over though, with Hardy fighting his way back to the main event rematch with Jeff Jarrett. He beat the Monster Abyss and the Alpha Male Monty Brown to set up the rematch at Victory Road. This match had another element to it, with Nash and Hall feuding. Hall was with Jarrett, whereas Nash was a face and siding with Jeff Hardy. The match itself wasn't that good, but there was many nice spots, which would almost mean this was a good match, but it wasn't. It was a bit off. And then to top it all off, Nash turned on Hardy to cost him the title, reuniting with Scott Hall and Jeff Jarrett. WCW 2000 back in full force. And then the TNA originals come down to the ring, and if you thought this was all random, well, this is followed by Randy Savage making his TNA debut. So this was going to be a story between Jarrett's guys and the TNA guys, the final man to match them being Randy Savage. It was definitely inspired a bit by the NWO, with the trio poisoning the essence of TNA wrestling, and the fact that they were members of the NWO in 2000 as well. But I will say, I have to mention this. This is one of the most random trios I've ever seen. The Randy Savage match turned out to be his very last one in TNA, and was mostly uneventful. AJ Styles and Jarrett were the best part of this match. Styles in particular was sensational in every situation that had the brightest lights. He always showed up. Savage barely featured, which was expected, and the faces stood tall. He couldn't even hit his elbow. He was not in the best condition. He knew it at the time as well. He didn't feel like he was the Randy Savage of old. Savage disappeared after this with no follow-up, since he never signed a contract, which might have been for the best, because Jeff Jarrett, even if Savage was in a wheelchair, was going to drag him, hit the guitar, and beat him. It was a common occurrence at this point. Hardy continued dealing with the Kings of Wrestling, following Turning Point with a focus on Scott Hall. Hall wasn't in the best condition, but it didn't last long. Hardy won before being confronted by the returning Abyss. He dropped him with a Black Hole Slam, and this was the start of a very intense feud between these two. Abyss stalked Hardy over the next few weeks in the lead up to their match at Against All Odds. Hardy started to match his intensity, and there was one simple reason for this feud. Abyss was just mad and wanted to lash out on somebody. Their match was called Full Metal Mayhem. It was a match that involved tables, ladders, and chairs. Now, Jeff Hardy went insane here, but this match honestly was sluggish and suffers a lot. It was spot heavy, which was expected, but they took a long time in setting up the tables. It just had some questionable moments. I know his leg went numb here for sure. No wonder Jeff's banged up. Like, look at this spot. Jeff went crazy here, he went insane, but even then, Abyss scored the win and the title shot. Hardy was still on him and felt like he was owed a rematch, which he got at Destination X. This was False Count Anywhere, and it was much better than their previous match. This one is one of the best Jeff Hardy matches in this TNA run. Jeff hit one of these early in the match, which was insane to me because, I don't know, the match just started. Maybe it's a good thing it didn't come up in this era, because I know for a fact that Darby Allin's spots would look amateur. I don't know how he would do it, but Jeff would find a way. Both men were resilient, although Abyss was a resilient monster. Hardy had to dig in deep to overcome the monster, and after the match, Abyss attacked. He brought the thumbtacks and dropped him with the Black Hole Slam. You'd think the story would continue, but it would be pushed to the side. It would be pushed to the side in favor of another story. So later that week on Impact, Raven asked Jeff Hardy to be his tag team partner. He felt like they should combine their fan bases or something like that. Hardy declined it, and Raven decided he hated Hardy after he declined to be his partner. Raven's dislike of Hardy comes from him wanting to combine their fan bases. In some ways, Raven was jealous of Hardy's popularity. He had his own popularity, but Jeff Hardy's was a bit more interesting. This led to a lockdown tables match. This one was solid, but similar to Hardy's previous matches, it doesn't rise above a certain level. It was still good though, you know? It's strange, but watching this run, he was popular and loved, but that energy didn't translate much to his performances. And the funny part is, these are his match specialties. Like, these are the matches tailored for Jeff Hardy. You have any of these matches in the previous or following years, they would be much better. He was set for a rematch against Raven at TNA Hard Justice, but he ended up no-showing the event. This is a horrible thing and one TNA would use to make an example out of him. And now at the time, Hardy had his issues, but this was very strange. Hardy said a snake ate his phone, and that's why I couldn't notify them in time. My dog ate my homework. TNA had to replace him with Sean Wallman in a House of Fun match. He was suspended for 3 months, and this was the beginning of the end for him in TNA. He returned at Sacrifice to cost Jarrett and Abyss the match. It felt like he was returning back to the title picture, which wasn't the case because, number one, Hardy wasn't in the best condition at the time and they couldn't trust him, but that's what it seemed like. He had a very basic match against Bobby Roode at Unbreakable, which resulted in a loss, before featuring in a Monsters Ball match at TNA Bound for Glory. This was probably Hardy's most iconic match in TNA. It's the one match to watch because it was Hardy at his best. This was prime Jeff Hardy, the craziest swanton in his entire career, and I don't think a single one comes close to this. He was so far out, and I was watching confused, like, how the hell is this guy actually gonna hit it? And then this madman took a pile driver from the top rope. Like, who does this? This was an insane match and definitely a highlight of Hardy's career. Him and Sabu were crazy during this one. It was a fast-paced battle that didn't overstay its welcome and established this match as chaotic and unpredictable. This ended up being one of Hardy's last appearances for TNA though. He had a very dull match against Monty Brown at Genesis for the right to become #1 contender, and at this point you can notice that they didn't trust him at all and their suspicions would end up true again. Now Snake didn't eat his phone this time around, but Hardy was supposed to wrestle on TNA's Turning Point pay-per-view. He wasn't even on the main card as well, but once again Hardy didn't show up, and that was the last of him in TNA. Hardy couldn't make it to the event and they punished him by suspending him. He never made a televised appearance again and only wrestled on collaborative shows. What's crazy is that while TNA wanted no part of him for the time being, and that would change of course as time went on, WWE wanted to sign him. Hardy also felt more motivated to return to WWE after hearing about their interest in May of 2006. He kept himself comfortable in training with Shannon Moore, and by that time, he didn't want to come back to TNA who softened up. And a part of that is despite Hardy being a mid-carder with no sign of a main event push, he was still selling merch. Even though Hardy has his problems, he has his fans who are dedicated and loyal and would spend money on the product to watch him, even if he's not in a big position. He ended up leaving TNA in July of 2006 in favor of a WWE return. So there it is, Jeff Hardy and TNA. Can't say I'm not disappointed. This is a very disappointing run when you think about Jeff Hardy. You think about a certain version of Jeff Hardy. What I seen here watching him, he was through the motions, he didn't care much, he had his own problems outside the ring, and there was a few performances such as his match with the Raven at Lockdown, his matches with Abyss, where he actually cared. It's just there wasn't much consistency with Jeff Hardy, and there wasn't a lot of effort. There was effort in his no DQ matches, but even some of those weren't as good as his WWE ones. There wasn't much with him here. He was zoned out, he didn't have great performances, a lot of his matches were dull, and the best part about Jeff Hardy in TNA is his entrance and his look. Like, he had a creative look at this point, the face paint and the Modest theme song, which a lot of people don't like, but I personally like. Everything about the vibe that Jeff Hardy brings is great, but once the bell rings, it's a different story. What I find funny about all of this is the fact that the moment he goes back to WWE, he suddenly becomes his old self again. Like, his first 3 months in WWE were better than anything he did in TNA, which is insane to me, because it's like, he was there, he just didn't flip the switch. He needed something to motivate him and help him focus more, and that was WWE. They helped him in that regard. Plus, he had Matt Hardy by his side, so he was more motivated. So yeah, alright, what'd you guys think of Jeff Hardy's TNA run? Please comment down below, and that's for his video. Make sure you hit the twist of fate on the like button, perhaps a swanton bomb on the subscribe button. Peace, I'm out.